I'm doing a test here in about 30 seconds. Turn this on.
You want to let Peter know when you do that?
Yeah.
Because he's on the live mic too, having a conversation.
Okay. So this is live?
Steve, it's muted here though.
Okay.
Well, it is better.
Can you hear me? How much do I like to talk to myself?
Well, yeah. I hate these things. I
know.
I can't do it all. So we appreciate people like
It
you.
is a classroom, and it's like everybody should be moving this way. No.
We complain about our students, and we do the same thing.
I really like I teach a BA 101 class, freshman class, and the classroom has 40 chairs, and there are 35 people in the class. So they I'm going to open the colloquium season for academic year 2016-17 and welcome you all to our first presentation. We have a pretty full schedule this year. We had thought we were going to be a little short of filling the slots that we have, but MJ tells me we're covering it pretty well. So can you tell me off the top of your head who our next speaker will be?
Mandy Link from the History Department will be our presenter on the 27th.
Okay, so we have a colloquium next week. 2 weeks? That's right. 2 weeks from today, Mandy Link in history. But today, we have my colleague from the College of Business and fellow economist, Peter Maille. And I think I've introduced you before. And I always like the bios that Peter gives me because they're not quite standard. And I can have lots of fun with these. So Peter says the following. His youngest son might say he is Dr. No. His oldest son might say nothing because he's a student here. But then I have quite the rant on this one. I think we'll pass that one up. Okay, we'll pass that one up. But if you want to see it, it's pretty interesting. His wife might say that he is someone who does a bad job of taking out the garbage.
That would be true.
My wife would say I don't ever take it out. His colleagues might say he doesn't swear much unless he is playing pool. And if you know Peter and his colleagues, they're frequently found down at Bud Jackson's on Friday afternoon. And I have had occasion to join them occasionally at a time or two, and it's a lot of fun. His teachers might say he's a very good, bad student, depending on which you asked. And his students might say, we'll refer to what my oldest son would say, and they would ask him if there's any extra credit. Economics can be that way. Otherwise, Peter worked for the federal government in Washington, D.C. I believe he did a stint in the Peace Corps in Africa as a forester, which he and I share in common. Not the Africa thing, but the forester thing. And he's running a small business and working for a nonprofit. He has a Ph.D. in natural resource economics, widely published, at least in his own mind. We all like to feel that. What's that? I do have the mic on. Yeah. It's just not amplified in here. And lastly, he arrived here at EOU 8 short or long years ago, depending on how you think about it, where he is an enthusiastic teacher, student of economics. So Peter already has a mic tapped in there. Again, the mics are mostly to pick up for broadcasting off campus because we are streaming this live. And with that, I will turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Steve. If anybody has trouble hearing me, just let me know. You just yell or raise your hand or something. Yeah, you know, power and decision making. We struggled with an image to give to MJ for this, and we came up with, you know, my co-author, he said, well, maybe a leader making a bad decision. And, you know, Wells Fargo comes to mind. I don't know if you follow the news, but that guy was, you know, canned himself yesterday, I guess. And whether or not that's entirely appropriate, I'm not 100% sure. You can tell me afterwards, okay? And, you know, I don't want to accuse decision makers of making bad decisions. That question mark is actually kind of supposed to be there, okay? Why leaders maybe might make bad decisions, or, you know, when their bad decisions aren't so good, why might that be? Johnny Fulfer, a talented, hardworking student, is kind of the lead author on this paper. And, you know, the capstone students last year certainly were part of the effort. Scott. Here's, you know, Scott is always out there for, like, questions, even though he didn't help me too much today when I asked you one. And, you know, the college gave us a little lab to do this work in. So jump right in. Neoclassical economics starts with this expected utility where, you know, expected utility is kind of a probability times a monetary amount. And we assume that people look at the different possibilities. Well, I could do this and I can hope to get this much money, or do this and I can hope to get that much money. And we pick the one that gives us the most. There's an example. It's the arithmetic is out here. You know, you have a 50-50 chance of gaining $100 or losing 50. Okay, so the expected value, 100 times 0.5 minus 50 times 0.5 gives you 25. And another possibility offers you a 60% chance of winning, gaining 100, 40% chance of losing 50. So we pick number 2. It has a slightly higher expected value. That's neoclassical economics, kind of figure out which is worth the most and then take it. I keep wanting to say, any questions? You know, yeah. But people don't really behave that way, okay? And so as a refinement, Kahneman and Tversky, or whatever, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They came up with prospect theory. For example, loss aversion. Okay, let's see. I'm going to ask for my first volunteer. There you go. Proximity is a bad thing. There's your choice. You have a 50% chance of gaining $110 or a 50% chance of losing 100. So 50-50 chance, gain 110 or lose 100. Would you just as soon say no thanks, or would you participate in that bet or that gamble?
I'm going to be conservative and say no thank you.
Right. And you know, the fact is that you could make that 150, you could make it 200, and a lot of people will still say no. Classical economics says they shouldn't, because the expected value of that is $5, right? 50% times 110 minus 50% times 100. You can expect to get a $5 payoff. But we're averse, we're loss averse. That messes up the neoclassical pretty economic models, but it represents what people are actually doing. Reference points. You know, when might a $1,000 Christmas bonus be a loss? Not asking questions, I guess. Well, when everybody else gets $2,000, or if you got $2,000 last year. So we gauged it by a reference point. It's not plus 1,000, it's actually minus 1,000. This is the kind of thing you can do when you study this stuff. I was afraid that my son was going to be here, but he's not, so I can go ahead. Little brother and big brother are sitting in the back seat. And so I asked little brother, who at the time is about, for us you can't tell him about this. No. Don't tell him I said that. This is a couple years ago, too. He's, old enough to talk, but not old enough to really, he's kind of naive still. And I said, Simon, would you rather me give you 2 donut holes and have your brother get 1, or you can have 3 and your brother gets 5? Anybody with a brother or sister knows exactly what is going to happen. He said, 2. And that messes up our simple economic models because 3 is more than 2. He should pick 3. But he was going by this reference point thing. And then being a beautiful, naive little boy, what he said was, it took him a minute or so, is there any way for me to get 3 and have Nathan not to get so many? He literally said it, yeah. So prospect theory captures that. It's similar. Now, instead of just straightforward probability times some money amount, there's 2 functions. Probability, this function, it's like a weighting. So instead of trying to calculate 0.12 or something, this function allows us, or it can account for when we're not so good, like for example with very small probabilities. People have trouble, we're not quite calculators. We have trouble accounting for those accurately. And instead of just the money, now we've got a function, literally an equation that kind of describes the value of that amount of money with a reference point in mind. So, it's not just a gain, it's a smaller gain than the other guy got, so it's a loss. That's prospect theory. And that's what happens basically when you've got some very intelligent psychologists that are looking at economics. That's the beauty of it. And I mean, he won a Nobel Prize in economics, but he is a psychologist. Okay, so that's prospect theories in the background. We appreciate the refinements on neoclassical economics. And now we've got this idea of power. And, amongst the psychology people, there is a definition. You have influence over others, you can control valuable resources, or you can administer rewards and punishments. So what we did is we took this decision-making, kind of the stuff that's bound up over here, and we combined it with the prospect theory and stuck in a little dose of power and ran an experiment. 63 students, nice division of men and women, and there was some extra credit offered by some classes. Okay, we did a trial run with the first 3, saw how it went. I know there's at least one person who participated in this study. Is there anybody, anybody else get sucked into this? Okay. Steve, afterwards, he came back and he said, that was strange. And you'll see what I mean. So they were randomly placed in high power or control groups based on the order they got in there. Johnny did all the kind of like interviews. They each took about 15 minutes in that econ lab in Zabel. Now, the power primed people. So these aren't naturally powerful people, right? They're a random group of people, half of which got primed with power. And this is what they do in the literature, so we didn't kind of make it up. They read out loud power terms like capability and, they recalled a time when they felt powerful and they had to talk a little bit about that. They read a little short story out loud. And then on the wall was, the way to have power is to take it, which is probably about when they started saying, what did I get myself into? But, we're going to go ahead. And then the other group, you wouldn't want to just let them go into the next phase without jumping through some hoops. So they read off neutral words, described a normal day, explained how they felt. You walked your dog, you had breakfast. It was a normal day, nothing out of the ordinary happened. So that's sitting there. Everybody did one of those 2 things. They answered 8 hypothetical questions of this type over here. You have a choice between this or this. Which would you pick? generally. After the trial run, there was a nice little useful refinement. We asked people how confident they were in their answer. So, Simon would say, "Oh, I'll take 2." And then he said, "But you know what? I'm not very happy. I'm not confident in that." They all had a chance to get a debriefing afterwards. So there's our questions. There's some statistics. 2 quick sample questions. Would you participate or not participate in a gamble with a 50% chance of winning 20 or 50% chance of losing 20? So just to check and make sure you're paying attention, Steve, what's the expected value? 0. So, there's no real reason to choose or not to choose that one. And in fact, 11 of the power primed group did it. 15 of the other group did it. Opted for the risky choice. The chi-square came out small and, basically statistically insignificant. Or, question 4, you can take $50, or you can participate in a gamble with a 25% chance of winning 500, 75% chance of losing 200. It gets a little tougher now. You've got 2 choices. One is take the $50. That comes with 100% probability, so its expected value would be $50. And I need to look up what the other one, if you multiply out the 500 and 0.25, 200.75 is a loss. That is a negative $25 expected value. So on average, you're going to lose some money on that. Well, darn it. 6 of the high-powered group chose that option. And that was enough to give us a reasonably high chi-square value, and we feel pretty confident in that. So, once you do that, you spend hours, days, weeks looking at the results. And what we got is, if you look at the ratio of gains to losses being greater than 1 or not. For example, here the gain was 500, the loss was 200. So the gain was bigger than the loss. Where that was the case, question 2, 4, and 8. Well, darn it. The power folks chose that every time. The non-power folks, they didn't. The same basic group of people, one went through this normal day thing, the other group went through this power thing, and those are the results.
Are those the results for the power group or the neutral group?
They're the results. Right there would be like 6 people from the power group chose the bet, and 0 people from the non-power group. So it's kind of combining, looking at the difference between the 2 groups. And so these test statistics are based on the difference between the control and the non-control in terms of their willingness to take that risky bet. When the gain was, the potential gain was bigger than the loss, they chose it. That kind of is, I'd choose a bigger gain and a smaller loss too. But because of the probabilities, right, the potential loss tended to be big. And so, unfortunately, negative expected value, negative expected value, negative expected value, those were the ones that the powerful people chose. So the question is, why would they go for a larger potential reward, but negative expected values? And you can either call it suboptimal, or there's a bias maybe at work. They're behaving like people, unfortunately, instead of, the models. Well, there's obviously a couple possibilities. Powerful people sometimes can feel quite confident, right? If you can imagine the old, I'm not sure the business folks can tell me if I'm wrong, 1 out of 7 businesses fails within a certain number of years. Well, then why would anybody start one if you only have a 1 in 7 chance of actually succeeding. And the reason is that, well, they have the idea, or they can, they're confident in their ability to succeed. But just like the main man, I'm not going to quibble with a Nobel Prize winner. We gave the probabilities. So it's not a question of somebody being confident in their abilities. You could be as confident as you want to be in terms of your ability to make a business go or not to crash in an airplane, but if you're faced with a coin toss, you're not going to affect that. So we kind of discount that. We also, it's supported by when we did the confidence in response measure, there was no difference between how confident the power people were in their answer and how confident the non-power people were. They both were, which is kind of interesting. So we throw that one out the window. So now we've got the psychology stuff, approach inhibition theory. This is like in social environments, building friendships, connections, and such. So it's not an economic idea, but with approach inhibition, approach being kind of pursuing rewards, and inhibition being kind of tending to avoid threat. Are there any psychology folks here? Maybe that's good. I don't know. But they found that power seemed to focus people on rewards. And then the same Anderson, a couple years later, he linked power and risk-taking. And he cited three possibilities. Succumbing to the lure of potential rewards. Consistent with in non-social or in social settings, paying attention to that reward. Optimistically calculating expected values, which is another way of saying, well, only 1 in 7 business owners succeeds, but I'll be that one, or they may be confident in their, basically back to confident in their abilities, capture the upside, deal with the downside, okay? And they kind of opted for 2 and 3. But we, based on the fact that the probabilities were given, it really decreases one's, the role that confidence can play. Basically, we told people what the probabilities were. And as difficult as some of these expected values are to calculate in your head, that applies for both groups, right? I mean, they're both were doing the same thing. So we see is the one group doing it differently than the other. We opt for that one where the power prime people seemed to focus on those large monetary rewards. Like 500 looks good compared to 200, and that low probability associated with it, the high probability of losing 200, well, let's not, focus so much on that. And these were suboptimal. In other words, risk-taking is not a bad thing. Everybody has to take it, but you want to optimize it. You don't want to take too much. You don't want to take bad ones. So what we did is, in the original article laying out prospect theory, they say, we may well need other variables in this model. It's very simple, it's elegant, but it's simple. We throw that guy in there, rho, and make that monetary amount a function of power. So rho's power, and if you can imagine, say, X is 10 bucks, X here is, say, $5, but there's a big probability associated with the $5 and a smaller one with the $10, well, that has a negative expected value, but what if that X was squared? Then all of a sudden you've got 100. It's not really 100, but that's the way they're behaving, okay? And over here you've got 5, squared is 25. Suddenly you've got them behaving as if there is a positive expected value. That's what we saw. They literally chose gambles that would lose, on average, lose money. And like these folks, that's kind of generating a model that fits the behavior as opposed to the other way around. You know, trying to fit people to a model. We're fitting the model to people. That's one way you can kind of account for what we saw. Oops. Sorry about that. Just added that there. And I don't think this is competing, but there's an Kahneman, you know, he provides a very sensible explanation that we can kind of, you know, it's a little more accessible. An example first. My son's upstairs and the music's too loud. Turn it down, right? And so he doesn't want to get yelled at, so he turns down the music. And as he's turning it down, he's not sure how far to go. And so he turns it down and he turns it down. And all of a sudden he starts to wonder, I wonder if that's enough. Am I going to get yelled at again? It's getting pretty low. I like it louder. The closer he gets to what would be the ideal kind of volume, well, the harder it is to figure out if he's not already there, right? And so you stop short. When you approach a target from a direction, as you approach it, you're less and less sure that you're not already there. And the mental costs in terms of your head get big. The gains from getting closer to your target get smaller and smaller, and all of a sudden you stop. That's what this all says. You know, they are attracted to that high reward. You know, it's a high reward, but it's not likely. And so then a powerful person, they're not dumb, you know. They're like, man, that 500 looks good from that, you know, 500 versus 200. But man, 200, there's 75% chance I'm going to get that. What would be does that make sense? And as they work their way towards whether or not it really makes sense, the cost of trying to get closer and figure out if they're not already there gets big enough so they stop short. Okay, that's kind of what we're thinking. Anchoring is an idea where the number that people will give you in response to a question like how many countries are there in Africa, or what's the right number for this or that, or how much would you be willing to pay, is very sensitive to like some initial value. Let's see. You know, we do the valuing environmental resource thing. How much would you be willing to pay to save the sandhill cranes? And if that thing goes 100, 200, 300, or from 100 to 300, you're going to pick, not 100, that's cheap, but 300 is a lot. You'll pick 200. By the same token, if you ask and you give 10, 20, and 30, whoa, not 10, 30 is a lot, I'm going to pick 20. You know, you get anchored in the numbers that are given to you, or you get kind of pulled towards an anchor, and we think that perhaps, you know, the power had people look at that high number, and then as they would revise the likelihood of that down, they stopped short, okay? But they started up with the high one. Now, when you look at other research like this, they typically come at it from a whole bunch of different ways. You know, they'll do 3 or 4 rounds of this, looking at different possibilities. And we only did one. So it's kind of novel, and it's interesting, but man, oh man, other rounds would flesh it out. And there are confounding factors. If you noticed, all those negative expected values were associated with questions that had unequal probabilities. So maybe that's what drove the thing. Some people don't like the priming stuff, taking some normal person and priming them. There are folks out there who say, well, you really, and a lot of research is based on actually measuring people's power. And then they are the power group, and other folks are the non-power group. Lots of more things to do. Oops. And you know, so what? A lot of the literature now comes from the business, on the business side, when they look at like CEOs like Mr. Wells Fargo, right? When they get very senior, they start to consolidate power, then it becomes very important that they have a strong board, is what you read there, to help rein them in. You know, these are not people who are trying to drive their company to ruin. Remember, a powerful person is in a position to dole out rewards. And so when they succeed at a bet, that gives them, you know, money to reward people with. When I get, you know, some payoff, well, you know, maybe eat out somewhere, play some more pool, but a powerful person is going to have that additional reason to want that higher payoff. And, you know, what is it? Forewarned is forearmed. You know, leaders that care, got to be careful. You know, they are susceptible to this. We got to get this finalized. We've been, you know, writing it all summer. And, you know, more work on the robustness. Does this stand up? Can we repeat it? You know, can we do it with powerful people instead of just average people that have been primed? I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of an anchoring bias. And there are clever ways to confuse people and make them wonder what they got into, but to see if, in fact, they're starting with that reward and then they're trying to revise it down to the real expected value. Or they're just, you know, not really counting on the probabilities, they're just going for the high number. I don't know. Oh, those are the other images, you know, and there's Mr. Wells Fargo who just yesterday quit stock price. That reminded me of my mother, you know, what she would say.
I have two questions, if I may. Were you tempted to look into, and maybe it's part of the future, certain characteristics of our group that would have led or some sort of pattern, which ones within the group chose and didn't choose?
Absolutely. We do have gender. So we'll make sure we check to see if there's any link there. You know, a lot of students, there's,
Personality, some sort of.
yeah.
I mean, obviously, some personality traits are associated with risk taking.
And
Secondly, would it be stupid to test whether you disempower somebody?
right,
You know, if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
empower somebody and they lose money, maybe you should disempower them.
Right.
And they would make a lot of money.
well, some of the papers do that. They'll do, instead of, we did high power and we try to do control, but they do high power and low power. They like, when were you like dealt a bad hand by the person in charge of you? And so that was their priming. But you know, there's also some stuff out there, and I don't know if this gets at exactly what you're talking about. We tend to think sometimes that not powerful people are going to be risk takers. They don't have as much to lose maybe, or they're in a position where they need to take more risk. But that doesn't seem to be borne out by the research. You know, it's these powerful people tend to be the risk takers to the point where they may do too much. You know, is that good?
Peter, just very quickly, the microphone in the back is accurate enough to pick up our questions and our voices. So in the past, we've walked around with a microphone. That made it convenient because I know who was going to ask the questions and you were limited to that person. I'm going to do my best to pick out hands as I see them come up and then coordinate the questions that way. I saw a hand appear in front. I think you had a hand up, and then I saw one over there. No, but I'll ask if you have a question. Sorry, if you have a question, go ahead and ask, and then I'll point you around.
I was just interested if you took the same group and then switched them to see if that would affect the results, if it really was
Right.
primed,
Right.
or if they were
Yeah.
like just maybe a week later, do
Right.
the same question with different numbers, with it, you know, see if the not primed group
Right.
became
Right.
more risk takers.
Yeah, well, these, you know, it's hard to get away from the difference between the two groups. You know, they literally were, we assume they were randomly kind of distributed, men, women, what do you call it, disciplines maybe, and we alternated one after the other. So there's power, non-power, power, non-power. So that does a good job of capturing like how things might have changed from one week to the next. But, you know, you ask, say that again?
Like you took the same control
Right.
And then the non-power group, they did the power.
Right. You
Prime
know,
them before, and to see, and then the prime one, you did the ordinary
Right.
day, and would the same people make the same decisions?
she says, now you can come to the capstone class because you can do that.
Okay.
People are way more plastic than we would like to believe. And it would not be surprising to have now a non-power person do power things if they were primed to do the power thing. Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah.
I thank you. This is so interesting, and I saw Johnny do his presentation at Colloquium, at Spring Symposium. So it's my second time around looking for this information. And even in the spring, I was interested in, my interest comes from maybe a more sociological position. So the ways in which we sort of socially construct positions of power, not only sort of business leaders, but also related to categories of privilege and unearned privilege, such as race, class, gender. One of the things it makes me think about is we have students coming to this campus with different levels of privilege, and they are differently attuned to risk. Right? So not maybe necessarily taking these kinds of risks, but enrolling in a certain amount of credits, for example. How risky is that?
Right.
Staying in college versus not staying in college. And some of those risks seem to me to be determined by their sociological privilege.
Right.
With folks who are in sort of power or privileged category are willing to take more risks than those that aren't. And I was wondering if you had thought at all about a sociological way of looking at this, because clearly you're, with the priming, you're sort of socializing these people to be in a category.
Yeah, you know, my guess is that if you were to look at the lesser privileged students, they do in fact take fewer classes because they're careful, right? You know, it seems consistent with that approach inhibition thing, where these guys that, you know, think they get shot out of a cannon from high school and they're ready to go, they'll sign up for 20 credits. And then hopefully not suffer from that, but, you know, they might go be a little more risk-taking. You know, but an interesting application would be if, in fact, people are so plastic, let's take those guys and prime them to be, you know, that's what convocation, when they come to a school, that is a chance to have things change on them. Yeah. Did that answer? Okay.
Jerry?
Peter, does the effect of OPM, other people's money, have any effect on the willingness to take risks? So if I have other people's money to gamble, I can indulge whatever I feel, because what am I going to lose? But I have an upside to it. So I'm gambling with someone else's money.
Right.
And then the second part of the question is, if I believe I've got enough money to cover my losses, once again, I can take risk. So if I know that I've got sufficient resources, it's like any of us going here to Las Vegas, and we're going with a penny or a nickel slot machine. So
Yeah.
if we lose $25, okay. Would that play any role? Like the Wells Fargo CEO, I'm playing with other people's money.
Right.
And even if I lose, I've got a pre-negotiated out, and I still have plenty of money.
Right. You know, that's the house money that was in the title, and it was a big part of the initial work, but it did not bear fruit. You know, so another test of this would be, forget about that. This is now about power and decision making. The house money, where all of a sudden you're playing with other person's money, you know, there was nothing there.
I'm sorry, there was nothing?
Yeah, we didn't have any results that made any sense to us. There didn't seem to be anything to talk about. But you also brought up not just house money, but something else.
Cover my losses.
Oh, and that gets at like,
25, but I could gain
right,
50, 75.
right. Well, you know, the confidence is in either your ability to take advantage of the upside or deal with the negative consequences. So if you have the money, you're more confident. Yeah.
I was thinking along those lines, and one of the things I was thinking about is one thing for a person to say that they would take that risk,
You know, it's very natural to say talk is cheap. Oh, I'll do that, you know. Well, oddly enough, when you look at that specifically, you find that they're pretty good. In other words, those reflect reality. Not perfectly, but they're good. Now, whether or not we did this in a kind of a rigorous enough way to make sure, that would be robustness. Let's do it again and see if we get the same result. But yeah, we don't discount it just because they're reported. There's times when it's obviously hard to do this kind of experiment with real money, because all of a sudden you need a big budget, right? Literally, people have gone to developing countries where a buck or two is a lot, and people behave just this way. They confirm the spoken results, and that, yeah, you know.
I'm curious how you chose the 8 questions you did. Because I mean, you mentioned this as one of the potential limiting factors at the end of the talk, about the fact that all of the high-risk, high-reward scenarios that you chose ultimately have negative expected value. And so, like classical economics, bad decisions.
Right.
And I think everything else that wasn't statistically significant had 0 expected value. You didn't have any scenarios that were high risk, high reward, but actually had positive expected values.
Yeah.
So how did you choose the 8?
We chose the 8 because you could ask Steve what it was like to sit through them, you know. And some of them were kind of, oh my God, you know, so you get pretty quickly to a fatigue thing. And also, how do we get through all these? We did 60 of them. But then, you know, if you were to scrutinize those questions, you would see why the very next round of this that I would do would be to refine those questions. You know, eliminate some of the confounding factors. There's 2 or 3 different kinds of questions, and I think they muddy the water a bit. Johnny was looking for very specific things throughout. You know, house money was part of it, but then there's some, I don't know, you know, that list was hard to read, but some deal with stocks. You know, you just had a big gain in the stock market. Your choices are to take the money and an annual income of this or invest it. And there's that risky thing. That's a different question than, you know, do you want, you know, $500 at 25% or 200? So that's a weakness. He put a lot of thought into it. A lot of thought was given, but in hindsight, it's like, okay, we'll redo that.
Did you consider asking them how often they would want to do this? And
No.
It seems like a risky person would say,
Right.
because if it's a positive value, then somebody should say, yeah, I'd be willing to do this an infinite number of times.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'd be willing to do this 0 times.
Right. You know, yeah, if you've got like that, what is it, that upper left-hand corner, your choice,
Yeah.
well, you know, you do it once, you get a 50% chance of losing $100. But if you can do it 10 times, the likelihood of you losing money goes down. And, okay, without trying to go into how and why, because I don't think I do a good job, Kahneman says you do it. It makes sense to do it, like that one time. You can justify, in other words, you can justify mathematically. I look at it as, that's one choice, but you know what? Every day you get similar ones. And so even though it's not that one, it's that one plus another one plus another one and plus another one. And so if you're too risk averse, you really shoot yourself in the foot.
Well, I mean, the other issue is that the whole expected value is not really a great way to look at it.
The whole second value?
The expected value
Oh, right.
is not the end all. I mean, if I'm trying to start a business and someone says, I'll have a bet, and if I win the bet, I get 100,000. If I lose the bet, I lose 110,000. You're trying to start a business. You're probably smart to take that bet because you've got a, whatever, your expected value many times would be bad, but you've got a 50-50 chance of being able to live your dream.
Well, and I'd say expected value is a very useful thing to know. You know, I wouldn't disregard it. I wouldn't discount it. It's a good thing to know, partly because you can use it, for example, to justify, if not that time, and maybe getting, you know, 50% chance of getting $5, or you know, the expected value of $5. Life presents you with that over and over again, and so if you're smart about it, take the risks that do have this positive expected value, you win out on average. Yeah, I wouldn't discount it. But prospect theory does just that. It's like it accommodates the fact that people don't really calculate expected values in their heads. That's not the way they behave.
Professor, my name's Sean Patella. If you're starting an own business, that actually would add a separate part to the equation, whereas what you were doing was you were gambling money for money, but having a business, like I'm going to start a business when I get out of university, that's a third part of the equation because that's something I own outside of the money.
Yeah, I started a business too. It was kind of, good job. When you get out of here, you're going to have two choices. Take a job with somebody that pays you an income, okay? And you could maybe say that's the riskless one. Relatively little risk associated with that. Or start a business. And that's risky. And you can look at the odds of succeeding, and then you can be confident in what you can do, and you may well do well, especially if coming out of here, right? But that's how I would use this to look at that. You're gonna make those choices, and hopefully it works out for you.
I was just wondering if the reason why this power front group seems to be not very risk averse. It's not so much that they're feeling powerful, but they're feeling invincible. So it's like the loss, even though there's a potential for a loss, they take that because they figure, no, I'm so powerful, it doesn't matter if I lose $300. I'll take this chance. It's more like a feeling of invulnerability, perhaps, rather than any other kind of factor that's causing them to take the riskier choice.
Right. Well, dealing with the downside is kind of lumped in with that confidence thing. But, whether or not there's a nifty little experiment that could isolate that, there probably is some clever little thing we can do, torment some more students, jump on board. Yeah. Try to tease that out.
It seems like, sorry to interrupt, but most of the successful, very successful entrepreneurs I know, they're not really calculating expected value. In fact, it would never occur to them that they would fail. Right? I mean, they're just going to make it happen. So this whole conscious decision thing it doesn't really,
Right.
they actually do.
If people actually started a business based on expected values, then we would not have any businesses start up. None. We wouldn't have started our B&B in West Virginia, that's for sure. And that's where prospect theory comes in. Let's build a theory around something that is based on the way people behave, not this expected value thing. But as an economist, I've studied this stuff, and expected value is a powerful idea. No, I don't disregard anything, basically. Business folks don't calculate expected value, but they sure put together a business plan that shows cash flows, right?
Right. Now, I think there's a difference between an entrepreneur and a business person. As a business person, I can calculate risks, right? It's expected value doesn't play a big role in that. As an entrepreneur, though,
Right.
I'm swinging to the fence.
Right.
I'm not expecting to fail.
Right, and it'd be fun to try to build a model that looks at that, a different approach.
If you're an entrepreneur, you're just thinking about the ones who have swung and hit. There's a whole bunch of others that swung and missed. And so it's not necessarily that they have this attitude caused them to hit or they're understanding expected value. They're just looking at
Is that, do you think that's related to the idea that a lot of entrepreneurs aren't stuck with the same deal they started with, in the sense that they're willing to, if this doesn't work, we're going to tweak it and change it? So it's an evolving idea rather than a set decision.
Yeah, it's not either up or down.
Right.
We're just going to keep iterating until we make it work.
You might be like a model that might get that is make the probabilities a function of your entrepreneurial drive or something like that. Hey, nobody else, it didn't work for anybody else, but I'm going to make it work. I have a good track record and I know it. And so those probabilities, one of those options that Anderson and Galinsky, you know, they optimistically calculate the probabilities, you know, and so, yeah, if you're very confident in yourself and you have a good track record or you're just going to swing for the fence, you think you can sway those probabilities by, you know, yeah. Does that kind of capture it, you think? A little bit.
It's a lot less analytical, it's just more goal-oriented approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a weird story. I played golf one time with an algae business. Nation's only educated truck stop operators. We come to this hole and have water in front of it, and I reach my bag and grab an old ball. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, there's water there. I usually hit it in the water, so I'm going to use an old ball so I don't waste a new ball." He hit me in the shoulder. He said, "You dummy, just use the good ball and then just aim at the hole, not the water."
Yeah. There's, you know, that kind of work. The guy, because evidently they keep track of all the golf stuff, a lot of the swings. And if you're shooting for, I don't golf, so I'll screw this up. If you're shooting for par, in other words, you want to avoid the bogey, is it? So if you're shooting for par, you have a much higher likelihood of making the putt than if you're shooting for a birdie, the same putt. You know, you don't want to miss and go negative, you know, you want to avoid that boat, but it's the same putt. And you would never get them to say, no, I concentrate more on avoiding a bogey than making a birdie. And the value associated with, like, because the data, there's a lot of data on people that play golf, I guess. Tiger Woods, that would have knocked a swing off per tournament or per year, and it would have translated into a lot more money. But as he was susceptible to the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. And I would support it. Put your best ball down there, and guess what? You're not going to land it in the water. Yeah. Anything else afterwards? Good? Good. There's cookies and stuff back there.
Thank you, Peter.
Nope. Good. There's the email for, you know, everybody has any questions or comments. We're looking for feedback, so please. Good, good, good. Good, good, good. Good, good, good. Good, good, good.